Lisa stood in the small room behind the church, holding her 3-month-old baby girl close to her chest. The white wedding dress hung on the door like a ghost of broken dreams. She had spent months planning this day, believing it would finally give her and little Rose the family they both needed. At 27, Lisa thought she had everything figured out. She met David at the coffee shop where she worked part-time. He was smooth-talking and well-dressed, always carrying a briefcase and talking about his big business deals. When he asked her out, she couldn't believe someone like him would notice someone like her, a single mom barely making ends meet. David seemed perfect. He brought flowers, took her to nice restaurants, and even bought toys for Rose. He told Lisa he loved her and wanted to take care of both of them. After just 4 months of dating, he proposed with a beautiful ring that must have cost more than Lisa made in 3 months. "I want to be Rose's dad," he had said, getting down on one knee in the park. "I want us to be a real family." Lisa said yes immediately. Here was her chance for the stability she had dreamed of since Rose was born. No more worrying about rent money. No more choosing between buying diapers or groceries. No more feeling like she was failing as a mother because she couldn't provide enough. But now, 15 minutes past the ceremony time, Lisa's phone buzzed with a text message that made her world collapse. The words were simple but devastating. "I can't go through with this. I'm sorry. Don't try to find me." Lisa read the message 3 times before it sank in. David was gone. Just like that. No explanation, no goodbye in person, nothing. She looked down at Rose, who was sleeping peacefully, unaware that their future had just disappeared. The church was full of people waiting. Lisa's few friends from work, David's family who had flown in from out of state, and the pastor who had agreed to perform the ceremony. What was she supposed to tell them? How could she walk out there and explain that the groom had simply vanished? Lisa's hands shook as she tried David's phone number. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again and again but got the same result. He had not only left her at the altar but had also turned off his phone, making it impossible for her to reach him. She thought about all the money she had spent on this wedding. Money she didn't have. She had used her credit cards to pay for the dress, the flowers, and the small reception at the community center. She had even taken time off work, which meant less money coming in. Now she would have all these bills and no way to pay them. Rose started to fuss, and Lisa realized she needed to feed her. But first she had to face the people in the church. She had to tell them that there would be no wedding today. She had to admit that once again, she had been abandoned by someone who promised to love her. Lisa's mother had left when she was 5, and her father had done his best, but worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. She swore she would never put her own child through that kind of uncertainty. Yet here she was, a single mother with no backup plan and a mountain of debt. As she heard the murmur of confused voices from the church, Lisa felt smaller than she ever had before. Rose was depending on her, but she felt like she was failing at every turn. She had trusted David completely, believed every word he said, and let herself imagine a future that was apparently never real. The pastor knocked on the door gently. "Lisa, is everything okay in there?" "Give me just 1 more minute," she called back, her voice cracking. Lisa looked at herself in the small mirror. Her makeup was starting to run from the tears she was trying to hold back. Her hair, which she had spent hours on that morning, now seemed silly and overdone. Everything about this day felt like a cruel joke. She had no choice but to go out there and face everyone. She had to tell them that David was gone and the wedding was off. Then she had to figure out how to pick up the pieces of her life once again. Rose opened her eyes and looked up at her mother with that trusting gaze that babies have. In that moment, Lisa made a promise to her daughter and to herself. She would never again put her faith in someone else to save them. She would find a way to make it on her own, no matter how hard it got. But first, she had to walk out of this room and face the most embarrassing moment of her life. She had to tell a church full of people that she had been left behind once again. The thought made her stomach turn, but she knew she couldn't hide in this little room forever. Lisa took a deep breath, picked up her purse, and headed for the door. Whatever came next, she and Rose would face it together. They had to. There was no one else left to depend on. The sound of her heels on the church floor seemed louder than thunder as she walked toward her uncertain future, carrying the most precious thing in her world in her arms. 3 weeks after the wedding disaster, Lisa sat in her tiny apartment surrounded by unpaid bills and rejection letters from job applications. Rose was crying again, and Lisa felt like crying too. The credit card companies were calling every day, and her landlord had already given her a warning about late rent. David's disappearance had left her in worse shape than before she met him. She had quit her coffee shop job when he convinced her she wouldn't need to work after they got married. Now the position was filled, and everywhere else she applied seemed to have too many candidates and not enough jobs. That's when the letter arrived from a lawyer in Montana. Lisa almost threw it away, thinking it was another bill collector. But when she opened it, she discovered something that changed everything. Her great-aunt Helen, whom she had only met twice as a child, had passed away and left her a farm. Lisa barely remembered Aunt Helen. She knew her dad's family had some kind of falling out years ago, and they rarely talked about the relatives back in Montana. But apparently, Helen had been keeping track of Lisa and knew about her situation. The lawyer explained that the farm was about 2 hours outside a small town called Cedar Ridge. It came with 60 acres of land, a farmhouse and some old outbuildings. There was no mortgage, but the property taxes were behind and the place needed a lot of work. Lisa stared at the letter for a long time. She knew nothing about farming or living in the country. She had lived in the city her whole life, and had never even owned a houseplant that lived more than a month. But what choice did she have? She was 3 months behind on rent. Her car was making strange noises, and her savings account had exactly $47 in it. 2 days later, Lisa packed everything she owned into her old Honda and started the long drive to Montana, with Rose sleeping in her car seat. The drive took 16 hours with stops for feeding and diaper changes. By the time they arrived at the farm, it was getting dark and Lisa was exhausted. The farmhouse looked like something from a horror movie. The front porch was sagging, several windows were boarded up, and weeds had taken over what used to be a yard. Inside wasn't much better. The electricity worked, but the plumbing was questionable, and there were mouse droppings in the kitchen cabinets. Lisa set up Rose's portable crib in the least dusty bedroom and tried to make the best of their first night. The house creaked and groaned with every gust of wind, and she jumped at every sound. She had never felt so alone in her life. The next morning brought new challenges. The nearest grocery store was 15 miles away in Cedar Ridge, which barely qualified as a town. It had one main street with a few shops, a diner, and a gas station. The people were friendly enough, but Lisa felt like an outsider in her city clothes and fancy car. Back at the farm, Lisa tried to assess what needed to be done. Everything needed to be done. The roof leaked in 3 places, the front steps were rotting, and something had clearly been living in the barn for quite some time. The fields were overgrown with weeds, and the fence around the property was falling down in several spots. Lisa had no idea where to start. She tried calling some repair companies, but they were either booked for months or wanted more money than she could even dream of having. One contractor took a look around and suggested she might be better off just tearing the whole place down and starting over. That first week was the hardest of Lisa's life. Rose seemed to sense her mother's stress and cried more than usual. The house was cold, drafty, and nothing worked the way it should. Lisa burned dinner every night because the old stove heated unevenly, and she couldn't figure out how to get hot water to last more than 5 minutes. She called her dad back in the city, but he was dealing with his own problems and couldn't offer much help. Her few friends were supportive but lived too far away to be of any practical use. Lisa had never felt so completely on her own, but slowly she started to figure things out. She learned to build fires in the old wood stove to keep warm. She discovered which faucets worked and which ones didn't. She found a local handyman who was willing to fix the worst problems in exchange for payment over time. The people in Cedar Ridge were different from city folks, but they were kind in their own way. The woman at the grocery store always asked about Rose and sometimes slipped extra coupons into Lisa's bag. The postman helped her figure out which bills were most urgent, and the librarian showed her books about basic home repair. After a month, Lisa realized something surprising. Despite all the problems and stress, she was sleeping better than she had in years. The quiet of the country was so different from the constant noise of the city. Rose seemed calmer too, spending hours watching the clouds move across the big sky through the window. Lisa started to think that maybe, just maybe, she could make this work. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be anything like the life she had planned, but it could be theirs. No one could take it away from them or disappear in the middle of the night. She didn't know yet how she would support herself and Rose, or how she would ever get the farm back in shape. But for the first time since David left, Lisa felt like she might have a future. It was scary and uncertain, but it was real, and it belonged to her. Tom Wilson had been watching the old Henderson place for weeks now. From his kitchen window he could see smoke coming from the chimney, which meant someone was finally living there again. Helen Henderson had been a good neighbor for the 34 years he'd lived on the adjacent ranch, and he was curious about who had taken over her property. Tom lived alone on his family's cattle ranch, the same land his grandfather had worked decades before. He was known around Cedar Ridge as a man of few words but reliable hands. When people needed help, Tom showed up with his tools and got to work. He didn't talk much, but he never said no to a neighbor in need. 3 years ago, Tom's world had fallen apart when his wife Amy died in a car accident on an icy road. She had been coming home from her doctor's appointment, excited to tell him about their first pregnancy. The accident took both Amy and their unborn baby, leaving Tom alone in a house that suddenly felt enormous and empty. Since then, Tom had thrown himself into ranch work. He got up before dawn, worked until exhaustion, and fell into bed too tired to think about what he had lost. The people in town understood his need for solitude and left, him alone with his grief, but when Tom saw the young woman struggling with what looked like a broken fence post while a baby cried in a carrier strapped to her back, something inside him stirred. He watched through his binoculars as she tried again and again to fix the fence, clearly having no idea what she was doing. The baby's cries carried across the field, and Tom found himself setting down his coffee cup and reaching for his hat. The first time Tom appeared at Lisa's farm, he didn't say much. He just showed up with a toolbox and started fixing the fence post she had been fighting with for 2 hours. Lisa was suspicious at first. In the city, strangers didn't just show up and start helping without wanting something in return. "I'm Tom," he said simply when she asked who he was. "I live next door." Next door was actually about half a mile away, but in ranch terms that counted as neighboring. Tom worked quietly and efficiently, replacing the broken post and restringing the wire. When he was done, he tipped his hat and walked back across the field without expecting thanks or payment. Lisa was confused but grateful. Rose had stopped crying as soon as Tom arrived, seeming fascinated by this tall, quiet man with gentle hands. When he left, Rose fussed until she couldn't see him anymore. The next week, Tom appeared again. This time he brought supplies to patch the holes in the roof. He worked methodically, not making conversation, but not unfriendly either. Lisa tried to help, holding tools and learning by watching. Tom was patient when she handed him the wrong thing, simply pointing to what he needed instead of making her feel foolish. "Why are you helping me?" Lisa finally asked during his third visit. Tom paused in his work, considering the question. "Helen was a good neighbor," he said eventually. "Figure I owe it to her to help whoever took over her place." But Lisa sensed there was more to it than that. She noticed how Tom's face softened when Rose babbled at him, and how he always made sure to work quietly when the baby was napping. There was a sadness in his eyes that Lisa recognized, the look of someone who had lost something precious. As autumn turned colder, Tom's visits became more frequent. He brought firewood that he claimed was extra from his own cutting. He showed Lisa how to bank the fire so it would last through the night. When her old washing machine broke down, he spent an entire Saturday figuring out how to fix it rather than suggesting she buy a new one. Lisa began to look forward to Tom's quiet presence. He never asked personal questions or made her feel like she owed him explanations. Unlike David, who had always wanted to know where she was going and what she was doing, Tom respected her privacy while still being genuinely helpful. Rose clearly adored Tom. She would laugh and reach for him whenever he appeared, and she seemed to save her biggest smiles for when he was around. Tom, despite his reserved nature, was surprisingly good with the baby. He knew exactly how to hold her and seemed to understand when she was tired or hungry, even before Lisa did. One afternoon, while Tom was fixing a loose step on the front porch, Lisa brought him coffee and found the courage to ask about his family. Tom's hand stilled on his tools, and for a moment Lisa thought she had overstepped. "Had a wife," he said quietly. "Lost her a few years back." Lisa understood immediately why Tom had that sad look in his eyes, and why he seemed to find purpose in helping her and Rose. They were all a bit broken. she realized, but maybe broken people could help each other heal. From that day forward, their interactions felt different. Tom still didn't talk much, but there was a comfort between them that hadn't been there before. When he worked around the farm, Lisa would bring Rose outside to sit on a blanket and watch. Tom would occasionally point out birds or make faces that made Rose giggle. Lisa began to feel like she wasn't facing everything alone anymore. Tom's steady presence gave her confidence to tackle bigger projects around the farm. When she decided to clear the vegetable garden area for spring planting, Tom showed up the next morning with a rototiller and spent the day helping her break up the hard soil. "You don't have to keep helping me," Lisa told him as they watched the sunset from her newly repaired front porch. "I know," Tom replied, his eyes on Rose, who was playing with blocks at their feet. "Want to, though." It was the most personal thing he had said to her, and Lisa felt something warm spread through her chest. For the first time since David's betrayal, she wondered if it might be possible to trust someone again. Tom's actions spoke louder than any words could, and everything he did showed her that some people really did mean what they said. As winter approached, Lisa realized that Tom had become more than just a helpful neighbor. He had become the steady foundation that she and Rose could count on, even if none of them were ready to put words to what that meant yet. The first snow came early that year, catching everyone in Cedar Ridge by surprise. Lisa woke up to find 3 inches of white powder covering everything, and her old house felt colder than ever. The heating system, which had been struggling for weeks, finally gave up completely during the night. Lisa bundled Rose in every blanket she could find and tried to get the wood stove going. But the chimney wasn't drawing properly, and smoke filled the kitchen instead of going up the flue. She was coughing and trying to open windows when she heard a familiar knock at the door. Tom stood on her porch with an armload of seasoned firewood and a concerned look on his face. He took one look at the smoky kitchen and immediately went to work on the chimney. Within an hour, he had cleared the blockage and had a proper fire going that actually heated the house instead of filling it with smoke. "Can't have you and the baby freezing," he said matter-of-factly, as if risking carbon monoxide poisoning was just a minor inconvenience. That afternoon, Tom returned with more supplies and spent the rest of the day weatherproofing the house. He sealed gaps around windows, added insulation to the attic, and showed Lisa how to bank the fire so it would burn safely all night. When the temperature dropped to 10 below that evening, Lisa's house stayed warm and comfortable. "How can I ever repay you for all this?" Lisa asked as Tom packed up his tools. "Don't need repaying," Tom replied. "Just glad you're both safe." But Lisa could see something in his eyes when he looked at Rose, who was babbling happily in her high chair. There was a tenderness there that made Lisa's heart ache for whatever loss had put that sadness in Tom's face. As winter settled in, Tom's visits became part of their routine. He would stop by every few days to check the fire, bring supplies, or fix whatever had broken since his last visit. Lisa began to depend on his quiet reliability in a way that both comforted and scared her. Unlike David, who had made grand promises and dramatic gestures, Tom showed his care through small, consistent actions. He never promised anything he couldn't deliver, and he never made Lisa feel like she owed him anything in return. His help came without strings attached, which was something entirely new in Lisa's experience. One evening in December, when a fierce blizzard knocked out power lines across the county, Tom appeared at Lisa's door with a lantern and a serious expression. "Roads are getting bad," he said. "Think you and Rose should come stay at my place until this blows over." "Got a generator and plenty of firewood," Lisa hesitated. Staying at Tom's house felt like crossing a line somehow, moving from neighborly help to something more personal. But Rose was shivering despite being wrapped in multiple blankets, and Lisa's house felt like an icebox without the electric heater. Tom's ranch house was everything Lisa's farmhouse wasn't: warm, solid, and well-maintained. The generator hummed quietly in the basement, providing steady power for lights and heat. Tom set them up in his guest room, which had clearly been prepared with care. There were fresh sheets on the bed, a space heater to keep the room extra warm, and even a few baby toys that Tom must have picked up in town. For 3 days, they lived together while the storm raged outside. Tom cooked simple but hearty meals, and Lisa was surprised to discover he was actually a better cook than she was. He knew exactly how to make Rose laugh during her fussy times, and he seemed to understand when Lisa needed quiet moments to herself. In the evenings, After Rose was asleep, Tom and Lisa would sit by the fire and talk. These were the longest conversations they had ever had, and Lisa learned that Tom was much more thoughtful and intelligent than his quiet nature suggested. He had studied agriculture in college, traveled a bit in his younger years, and had once considered becoming a veterinarian before taking over the family ranch. Tom also opened up about Amy, his wife, though it clearly still caused him pain to talk about her. They had been high school sweethearts who married young and were thrilled to finally be starting a family when the accident happened. Tom blamed himself for not driving Amy to her appointment that day, even though everyone told him the icy roads could have claimed anyone. "Some days I still set 2 coffee cups out in the morning," Tom admitted one night, staring into the fire. 3 years and I still forget sometimes that she's not coming back." Lisa understood that kind of pain, though hers was different. She had been abandoned rather than bereaved, betrayed rather than widowed, but they both knew what it felt like to have their future ripped away without warning. "Do you think you'll ever want to try again?" Lisa asked quietly. "I mean, with someone new?" Tom was quiet for so long that Lisa thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, "Didn't think so until recently." The way he looked at her when he said it made Lisa's heart race. She had been so focused on survival and getting the farm functional that she hadn't allowed herself to think about romantic feelings. But sitting in Tom's warm house, watching him be so gentle with Rose, Lisa realized her feelings for him had been growing stronger without her even noticing. When the storm finally passed and the roads were clear, Tom drove them back to the farm in his truck. The house felt cold and empty after the warmth of his place, and Lisa found herself missing their evening conversations by the fire. "Thank you," she said, as Tom helped carry Rose's things back inside. "For everything. Not just the storm, but all of it." Tom paused in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "Lisa," he said, and then stopped as if he was trying to find the right words. "What is it?" she asked. "Nothing," he said finally. I'm glad you came here. Glad Helen left you the farm." After he left, Lisa realized that for the first time since arriving in Montana, the farmhouse felt like home, not because of the building itself, which was still old and drafty, but because of the people who made it feel safe and welcoming. Tom had become part of their little family without either of them officially acknowledging it, and Lisa wasn't sure what that meant for their future, but she was beginning to hope it meant something good. Spring arrived in Cedar Ridge like a promise kept. The snow melted away to reveal green grass pushing through the brown earth, and Lisa felt something awakening in herself that had been dormant through the long winter. Rose, now almost a year old, was pulling herself up on furniture and babbling constantly, as if she had important things to say about their new life. Lisa had survived her first Montana winter, and that felt like a victory worth celebrating. The farm was starting to look like a real home rather than a collection of problems to solve. With Tom's help, she had learned to manage the wood stove, fix basic plumbing issues, and even replace a few broken fence posts on her own. More importantly, she had learned to trust again, though she was only beginning to admit it to herself. Tom's visits had become so regular that Rose would crawl to the window every morning around 9 o'clock, looking for his truck. When she spotted him coming up the drive, she would clap her hands and babble excitedly, trying to get Lisa's attention. "Your boyfriend's here," Lisa would tease Rose. But lately, the joke felt less funny and more like wishful thinking. One warm April morning, Tom arrived with a box of vegetable seedlings and offered to help Lisa start a proper garden. They spent the day working side by side, preparing the soil and planning where each type of plant would go. Rose crawled around on a blanket, occasionally eating dirt and making them both laugh. Amy loved gardening, Tom said quietly as they worked. It was the first time he had mentioned his wife's name in months. She would have liked this, seeing something good growing here again. Lisa looked at him carefully. "Do you think she would have minded? You helping me, I mean?" Tom leaned back on his heels, considering the question seriously. "Amy wasn't the jealous type. She would have wanted me to be happy." He paused, his hand still in the dirt. "Think she would have liked you?" The simple statement made Lisa's chest tight with emotion. She had never expected to care what a woman she'd never met would have thought of her. But somehow Tom's belief that Amy would have approved meant everything. As they planted tomatoes and peppers, Tom began sharing memories of his marriage that weren't just about loss and grief. He told Lisa about Amy's terrible cooking, her collection of stray cats, and her habit of singing off-key while doing dishes. These stories painted a picture of a real relationship with flaws and joys, not just the perfect romance that grief sometimes creates. "What about Rose's father?" Tom asked during a break, while they watched the baby chase a butterfly across the yard. "Do you ever hear from him?" Lisa stiffened. She had been dreading this conversation, even though she knew it would come eventually. "He's not in the picture," she said carefully, "by his choice or yours." The directness of the question surprised Lisa. Tom usually let her share what she wanted to share without pushing for details. But something about the warm spring day and their growing closeness made the truth want to spill out of her. "Both, I guess," Lisa said finally. "Rose's biological father was just a guy I dated briefly. When I told him I was pregnant, he made it clear he wasn't interested in being a dad. I haven't heard from him since." Tom nodded without judgment, encouraging her to continue. "Then I met David, and I thought he was my salvation. He said he wanted to marry me and adopt Rose. Give us the family I thought we needed." Lisa's voice grew bitter. "Turns out he just liked the idea of playing house until it got real." "The one who left you at the altar?" Lisa looked at him in surprise. She had never told Tom the details of how she ended up in Montana. "How did you know about that?" "Small town," Tom said with a slight smile. "People talk. Mrs. Henderson at the post office knows everything about everyone." Lisa felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "So everyone in town knows I was dumped on my wedding day? That's just perfect." "Hey," Tom said gently, reaching over to touch her hand. "What they know is that some fool didn't recognize what he had, and lost the best thing that ever happened to him." The sincerity in Tom's voice made Lisa look up at him in surprise. Their eyes met and held, and for a moment the air between them felt charged with possibility. Rose chose that moment to fall over and start crying, breaking the spell. Tom immediately went to comfort her, scooping her up and making silly faces until she was giggling again. Watching him with her daughter, Lisa felt her heart do something complicated and wonderful. Later that evening, as Tom was getting ready to leave, Rose surprised them both by pulling herself up on his leg and saying, "Da-da, clear as day." Lisa felt her face go red. "Rose, no, he's not." But Tom was smiling, a real smile that transformed his whole face. "Smart girl," he told Rose, picking her up and kissing her forehead. "You know a good thing when you see it." The casual way he accepted Rose's declaration made Lisa's heart pound. David had always been uncomfortable when people assumed he was Rose's father, quick to correct them and explain that he was just the boyfriend. But Tom seemed genuinely pleased by the baby's mistake. After Tom left that night, Lisa sat on her porch and tried to sort through her feelings. She was falling for him, had been falling for him for months if she was honest. But she was terrified of trusting her judgment again. What if she was wrong about Tom the way she had been wrong about David? The next morning, Tom arrived earlier than usual with coffee and breakfast from the diner in town. "Thought you might be tired of your own cooking," he said with a grin. As they ate together on the porch, with Rose in her high chair making a mess of scrambled eggs, Lisa realized this felt like what she had always wanted family to feel like. Not the formal, perfect family that David had promised, but something real and comfortable and right. "Tom," she said carefully, "what are we doing here?" He looked at her seriously. "What do you want us to be doing?" It was such a Tom answer, direct and honest, putting the choice in her hands. Lisa took a deep breath and decided to be brave. "I want us to be building something together," she said. "Something real." Tom reached across the table and took her hand. "Then that's what we're doing," he said simply. Rose banged her spoon on her tray and yelled, "Da-da," again making them both laugh. "Guess she's already decided," Tom said, and Lisa knew that her heart was finally ready to trust again. Lisa was hanging laundry on the line behind the farmhouse when she heard a car coming up the gravel drive. Tom wasn't expected until later, and his truck sounded different anyway. She picked up Rose from her playpen and walked around to the front of the house to see who was visiting. Her blood turned to ice when she saw the shiny black sedan and the man getting out of it. David looked exactly the same as he had 8 months ago. Perfectly dressed, confident smile, expensive haircut. He looked completely out of place against the backdrop of the rural farm, like a businessman who had taken a wrong turn. "Hello, Lisa," David said, as if he had just seen her yesterday instead of abandoning her at the altar. "You're looking well." Country life seems to agree with you. Lisa instinctively held Rose closer. The baby was staring at David with the serious expression she reserved for strangers, clearly not recognizing the man who had once promised to be her father. "What are you doing here, David?" Lisa's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I came to apologize," David said, flashing that charming smile that had once made Lisa's heart race. Now it just made her feel sick. "And to ask for another chance. I made a terrible mistake and I want to make it right." Lisa couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You left me at the altar, David. You disappeared without explanation and left me with bills I couldn't pay and a church full of confused people. You think you can just show up here and ask for another chance?" "I know how it looked," David said, stepping closer. "But I got scared. The responsibility of instant fatherhood, the commitment, it overwhelmed me. I needed time to figure things out. 8 months?" Lisa's voice rose. "You needed 8 months to figure out whether you wanted to marry me?" David had the grace to look ashamed. "I know it was too long, but I've been thinking about you and Rose every day. I realize now that you two are what I want. You're my family." Rose started to fuss, picking up on her mother's tension. Lisa bounced her gently, trying to stay calm. "We're not your family, David. We never were. You made that very clear when you ran away. People make mistakes, Lisa. I'm here now, aren't I? I want to try again. I want to marry you and give Rose my name. We can have the life we planned." "The life you planned," Lisa corrected. "I never wanted to be a housewife dependent on someone else's income. I never wanted to sit around waiting for someone to take care of me." David looked around at the farm with barely concealed disdain. "And what do you call this? You're living in the middle of nowhere in a house that should probably be condemned. How is this better than what I was offering?" Before Lisa could respond, she heard the familiar sound of Tom's truck coming up the drive. Her heart lifted with relief, but she also felt a stab of anxiety. She hadn't told Tom about her past with David beyond the basic facts, and she had no idea how he would react to meeting the man who had hurt her so badly. Tom parked his truck and got out slowly, taking in the scene with those observant eyes. He nodded politely to David but positioned himself close to Lisa, a subtle show of support that didn't go unnoticed. "Tom, this is David," Lisa said, her voice tight. "David, this is my neighbor Tom." David extended his hand with that politician's smile. "Nice to meet you. I'm Lisa's fiancé." "Ex-fiancé," Lisa corrected quickly. "Very ex." Tom shook David's hand briefly, his expression unreadable. "Tom Wilson," he said simply. David sized Tom up, taking in the work clothes, the calloused hands, the quiet demeanor. Lisa could practically see him dismissing Tom as unimportant, which was a mistake that revealed everything about David's character. "Well, Tom, I appreciate you helping Lisa out while she's been here," David said in a condescending tone. "But she won't be needing your assistance much longer. We're going to work things out and head back to civilization." Lisa felt anger flare in her chest. "Excuse me? You don't get to make decisions about my life, David. And you certainly don't get to be rude to someone who's been nothing but kind to me and Rose." "Lisa, be reasonable," David said, his charm starting to slip. "Look at this place. You're trying to fix up a falling down farm with no money and no experience. How long do you think you can keep this up? What happens when winter comes and something serious breaks? What happens when Rose gets sick and you're an hour from the nearest hospital?" His words hit close to home because they echoed Lisa's own fears. She had worried about all those things during the long winter nights, but hearing them from David, said in that superior tone, made her realize how much she had changed. "I'll figure it out," Lisa said firmly. "I've been figuring it out for 8 months and I'll keep figuring it out." "You don't have to figure it out alone," David said, softening his approach. "I have a good job, benefits, security. I can give Rose everything she needs. Good schools, college fund, opportunities you can't provide out here." Rose chose that moment to reach toward Tom, babbling "da-da" and trying to get to him. Tom stepped forward and took her naturally, and she immediately relaxed in his arms. David's face darkened.
"What's this about?"
"How long has this been going on?" "That's none of your business," Lisa said. "It is my business if you're playing house with some farmer while my daughter calls him daddy." "Your daughter?" Lisa's voice was dangerously quiet. "Rose is not your daughter, David. You made that very clear when you disappeared. You have no rights here." Tom spoke for the first time since the introductions. "I think you should leave." David laughed harshly. "I'm sorry, but this is between Lisa and me. You're just the hired help. That was the wrong thing to say. Lisa stepped forward, her eyes blazing. Tom has not hired help. He's been more of a father to Rose in 8 months than you ever tried to be. He's been here for every late-night fever, every first word, every small victory. Where were you? I was getting my life together so I could provide for you properly, David shot back. No, Lisa said. You were being a coward. And now you want to waltz back in and pretend nothing happened? You want me to just forget that you broke my heart and left me with nothing? You want me to give up the life I've built here and go back to depending on someone who already proved he can't be trusted? David's mask finally slipped completely. Fine, have it your way. But don't come crying to me when reality sets in and you realize you're in over your head. And don't expect me to still be available when your little farm fantasy falls apart. I won't, Lisa said simply. David got back in his car and drove away without another word, leaving Lisa shaking with adrenaline and emotion. Tom handed Rose back to her mother and put a gentle hand on Lisa's shoulder. You okay? Lisa looked up at him. This quiet, steady man who had never made her promises he couldn't keep, who had never tried to change her into someone else, who loved Rose like she was his own. Yeah, she said, meaning it. I'm okay. But as they watched David's car disappear down the road, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. David had never been good at accepting rejection, and his parting words felt more like a threat than a goodbye. 2 weeks after David's unexpected visit, Lisa was starting to believe she had seen the last of him. Life had returned to its comfortable rhythm of farm work, Tom's daily visits, and Rose's constant discoveries about the world around her. She was in the garden picking tomatoes when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Lisa, it's David. Before you hang up, please listen to me. Lisa's hand tightened on the phone. I thought I made myself clear. There's nothing left to discuss. There is, actually. I've been doing some research on your situation there. Did you know you're 3 months behind on property taxes? And the county has filed a lien against the farm? Lisa's blood went cold. She had been so focused on day-to-day survival that she hadn't looked closely at all the legal paperwork that came with inheriting the farm. How do you know that? It's public record, Lisa. Anyone can look it up. The point is, you're about to lose everything, but I can help you. I can pay off the taxes, get the lien cleared, and we can start fresh somewhere else. What's the catch? Lisa asked, though she already knew. No catch. Just come back to me. Bring Rose and come home where you belong. You've proven you can be independent. You don't need to keep proving it at the expense of your future. Lisa sank down on the porch steps, still holding the phone. She hadn't known about the tax lien, and the thought of losing the farm terrified her. This place had become home in a way nowhere else ever had. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, but don't take too long, Lisa. These things have a way of snowballing. After David hung up, Lisa sat on the porch feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She had been so proud of making it on her own. But what if David was right? What if she was just playing at independence while real life closed in around her? When Tom arrived that afternoon, he immediately noticed something was wrong. What happened? He asked, sitting beside her on the porch steps. Lisa told him about David's call and the tax situation. Tom listened without interrupting, his face growing more serious as she talked. I can look into the tax thing, he said when she finished. Sometimes the county will work out payment plans if you talk to them. And if they won't? Tom was quiet for a moment. We'll figure something out. But Lisa could see the worry in his eyes, and it matched her own. How much money could a small-time rancher have? She couldn't ask Tom to bail her out financially. That would make her just as dependent on him as she would have been on David. That night, Lisa lay awake staring at the ceiling and weighing her options. David was offering security and stability, the same things she had wanted when she first agreed to marry him. He could solve her financial problems with a phone call, and Rose would have every advantage money could provide. But the thought of going back to David made her feel sick. She knew now what real love looked like, and it wasn't grand gestures and expensive solutions. It was Tom showing up every day, patient and steady. It was the way Rose lit up when she saw his truck coming up the drive. It was the feeling of safety that came from being with someone who chose to be there, not someone who stayed out of obligation or guilt. 3 days later, the choice was taken out of her hands. Lisa woke up in the middle of the night to Rose crying, but it wasn't her usual fussy cry. This was different, weak and labored. When Lisa turned on the light, She saw that Rose's face was flushed with fever and she was struggling to breathe. Lisa's hands shook as she called 911, but the nearest ambulance was 40 minutes away. She called Tom next and he arrived in less than 10 minutes, still in his pajamas. "We need to get her to the hospital now," Tom said, taking one look at Rose. "My truck will be faster than waiting for the ambulance." The drive to the hospital was the longest hour of Lisa's life. Rose's breathing got more labored, and her fever seemed to be climbing despite the medicine Lisa had given her. Tom drove as fast as he safely could while Lisa sat in the back seat holding her daughter and praying harder than she ever had in her life. At the hospital, the doctors immediately took Rose into the emergency room. The diagnosis was pneumonia, and it was serious enough that they admitted her to the pediatric ICU. Lisa was barely holding herself together as they hooked Rose up to oxygen and IV lines. "She's going to be okay," the doctor assured Lisa. "But it's going to be a rough few days. These things can be scary, but kids are resilient." For the next 3 days, Lisa never left Rose's side. She slept in the uncomfortable hospital chair, ate terrible cafeteria food, and watched every rise and fall of her daughter's chest. Tom was there too, bringing Lisa real food, fresh clothes, and quiet support. On the second day, David showed up. Lisa was half asleep in her chair when she heard his voice in the hallway, arguing with a nurse about visiting hours. When he finally made it into the room, his face was pale with genuine concern. "How is she?" he asked, looking at Rose's tiny form surrounded by medical equipment. "She's stable," Lisa said, not moving from her position beside the bed. "The antibiotics are working." David stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, clearly uncomfortable in the hospital setting. "This is what I was talking about, Lisa. If you had been in the city, this never would have gotten this serious. Rose would have gotten medical attention immediately. Tom got us here just as fast as any city ambulance would have," Lisa said firmly. "But if this happens again, we'll handle it the same way. Together." David looked around the room and seemed to notice Tom for the first time sitting quietly in the corner chair. "Has he been here the whole time?" "Yes," Lisa said simply. David's face changed as understanding dawned. "You're choosing him. You're actually choosing some farmer over the security I can give you and Rose." Lisa looked at Tom, who was holding a cup of coffee he had brought her, ready to hand it over whenever she needed it. His clothes were wrinkled from sleeping in the hospital chair. His hair was messy and he looked exhausted. But his eyes were steady and full of love, for both her and Rose. "I'm not choosing between you and Tom," Lisa said quietly. "I'm choosing between fear and love. Between a life where I'm taken care of and a life where I'm a full partner. Between someone who wants to solve my problems for me and someone who wants to solve them with me." Rose stirred in her sleep and made a soft sound. Both Lisa and Tom immediately leaned forward, but it was Tom who reached out first to gently stroke Rose's hair. "Dada," Rose whispered, her eyes still closed. David saw it too. The natural, unconscious way Tom responded to Rose, the way the baby instinctively reached for him even in her sleep. For the first time since Lisa had known him, David looked defeated. "I could give her everything," he said quietly. "You could give her things," Lisa replied. "Tom gives her himself. That's what Rose needs. That's what I need too." David nodded slowly, finally understanding that he had lost. Not to another man, but to a different kind of love entirely. "I hope you're right, Lisa. For Rose's sake, I hope you're making the right choice." After David left, Lisa felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. Tom moved his chair closer to her bed and took her hand. "Was that the right choice?" Lisa asked, suddenly needing to hear him say it. "For me it was," Tom said simply. "But the question is whether it was right for you." Lisa looked down at Rose, who was breathing easier now, her fever finally breaking. Then she looked at Tom, who had spent 3 days in an uncomfortable hospital chair just to be there for them, who had never once suggested that Lisa should have handled things differently or made different choices. "Yes," Lisa said, "it was right for me too." That night, as Rose continued to improve and the crisis passed, Lisa realized that she had finally learned the difference between being rescued and being loved. David had wanted to rescue her, but Tom loved her. Completely, conditionally, with all her struggles and imperfections, and that made all the difference in the world. 2 years later, Lisa stood in front of the same church, where she had once experienced the worst day of her life. But this time everything was different. This time she wasn't a desperate woman seeking rescue. She was a confident partner choosing love. The old St. Mary's Chapel looked exactly the same, but Lisa felt like a completely different person walking through those doors. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that she had picked out herself, not the elaborate gown that David had insisted on. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun with wildflowers from her own garden tucked behind her ear. Most importantly, she wasn't alone. Rose, now 2.5 years old, walked beside her carrying a small basket of flower petals. The little girl took her job as flower girl very seriously, carefully dropping petals every few steps just like they had practiced. "Mama, is this where you and Daddy Tom are getting married?" Rose asked in her clear, bright voice. "That's right, sweetheart," Lisa said, smoothing Rose's yellow dress. "Are you ready to help us?" Rose nodded solemnly, then broke into a grin. "I love Daddy Tom," Lisa's heart swelled. Tom had been Daddy Tom for over a year now, ever since he had officially adopted Rose. The legal process had been complicated, but Tom had insisted on making it official. "She's my daughter in every way that matters," he had told the lawyer. "I want it to be legal, too." The church was full, but with different faces this time. The people of Cedar Ridge had embraced Lisa and Rose as their own, and it seemed like half the town had come to celebrate their wedding. Mrs. Henderson from the post office was there, along with the librarian, the owner of the diner, and dozens of neighbors Lisa had come to know and love. Tom's family had driven in from 3 states away, cousins and aunts and uncles who had welcomed Lisa and Rose with open arms. They were nothing like David's family, who had always made Lisa feel like she wasn't quite good enough. Tom's people were warm and genuine, more interested in hearing about the farm than in judging Lisa's past. As the music started and Lisa walked down the aisle with Rose beside her, she saw Tom waiting at the altar. He looked handsome in his navy suit, but more than that, he looked happy. His face lit up when he saw them coming, and Lisa felt her heart do that familiar flip it had been doing for 2 years now. When they reached the altar, Rose immediately ran to Tom, who scooped her up and kissed her forehead. "You did a great job with those flowers, little bug," he whispered, making Rose giggle. The pastor, who had known Tom since he was born, smiled at the 3 of them. "Friends," he said to the gathered crowd, "we're here today to celebrate not just a marriage, but the formation of a family that has already been growing in love for quite some time." Lisa and Tom had written their own vows, and when it was her turn to speak, Lisa looked into Tom's steady brown eyes and felt overwhelmed by how far they had all come. "Tom," she began, her voice strong and clear. "2 years ago, I came to Cedar Ridge broken and scared, trying to figure out how to build a life for my daughter and myself. I thought I needed someone to save me, but what I really needed was someone to walk beside me while I saved myself." She paused, glancing at Rose, who was now sitting quietly in the front pew with Tom's aunt. "You taught me that love isn't about grand gestures or promises of perfection. It's about showing up every day, even when things are hard. It's about choosing each other over and over again, through sick babies and broken pipes and tax liens and all the ordinary challenges that make up a real life." Tom's eyes were bright with unshed tears, and Lisa felt her own voice waver with emotion. "You loved Rose before you loved me, and that showed me the kind of man you are. You didn't just accept my daughter. You claimed her as your own and gave her the father she deserved. You made us both feel like we belonged somewhere, like we were home." Lisa reached for Tom's hands. "So today, I'm not just promising to be your wife. I'm promising to be your partner in building the life we've already started. I promise to trust you with my heart, to work beside you in whatever comes next, and to love you not just for who you are today, but for who we're becoming together." When it was Tom's turn, he spoke in that quiet, steady voice that had become Lisa's favorite sound in the world. "Lisa," he said, "I spent 3 years thinking my life was over, that I would never have a family or feel at home anywhere again. Then you and Rose showed up and reminded me that love doesn't run out just because you've lost it once. It grows back, sometimes even stronger than before." He looked over at Rose, who waved at him from her seat. "Rose, you made me a daddy before your mama made me a husband, and that's one of the greatest gifts I've ever received. I promise to love you and protect you and teach you how to drive a tractor when you're old enough, even though it's going to give your mama a heart attack." The congregation laughed and Rose clapped her hands. Not understanding the joke but enjoying the attention, Tom turned back to Lisa. "And Lisa, you taught me that it's possible to build something beautiful from broken pieces. Our family might not look like what anyone expected, but it's exactly what we all needed. I promise to keep showing up, keep choosing you and Rose, and keep believing in the life we're building together." When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Tom kissed Lisa gently while Rose cheered from the front row. The church erupted in applause, and Lisa felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The reception was held at the community center, decorated with flowers from Lisa's garden, and photos documenting their journey from broken strangers to a complete family. Lisa's dad had made the trip from the city, and she was proud to introduce him to the life she had built. He seemed amazed by the transformation in his daughter, from the desperate woman who had left the city to this confident, radiant bride. "You did good, kiddo," he told her during their father-daughter dance. "This Tom of yours is a keeper." "I know," Lisa said, watching her new husband dance with Rose, both of them laughing as Rose stood on his feet and let him guide her around the floor. "I really know." Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and Rose was asleep in her crib, Lisa and Tom sat on the porch of their farmhouse now that Tom had officially moved in. The property taxes had been resolved with help from Tom's family and a small business loan, and the farm was finally starting to turn a profit with their combined efforts. "Do you ever regret it?" Tom asked, his arm around Lisa as they watched the stars come out over their fields. "Staying here, choosing this life?" Lisa thought about the question seriously. Their life wasn't easy, farming never was. There were still broken pipes and sick animals and months when money was tight. But there was also this, sitting on their own porch with their daughter safe in her bed and a future full of possibilities stretching out before them. "Never," Lisa said, and meant it completely. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." Tom kissed the top of her head. "Good," he said, "because I'm not letting you go anywhere." From inside the house, they heard Rose talking to herself in her crib, probably practicing new words or telling her stuffed animals about the wedding. The sound made them both smile. "Think she'll remember today?" Lisa asked. "She'll remember that it was the day her family became official," Tom said, "and that's enough." As they sat together in the comfortable silence of home, Lisa reflected on how the worst day of her life had led to the best days. She had been abandoned at the altar with a newborn baby, convinced her life was over. But sometimes what looks like an ending is actually just the beginning of something better than you ever could have planned. Rose would grow up knowing that families come in all shapes and sizes, that love is a choice you make every day, and that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the most broken beginnings. She would learn from watching her parents that real love isn't about being rescued, it's about finding someone who will walk beside you while you become the person you were always meant to be. And Lisa would never again confuse security with love, or mistake grand gestures for true commitment. She had learned that the deepest love shows itself in the smallest moments, in morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, in patient hands fixing whatever was broken, and in the choice to stay when staying is hard. The farmhouse creaked gently around them as they sat together under the vast Montana sky, and Lisa knew they were exactly where they belonged.